Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of the Minigame Podcast. We will do some warm up for about an hour and then we'll jump into the video game news. Today is Wednesday, April 16th, and although weirdly the algorithm has pushed me towards streaming closer towards midnight on Wednesdays, Mondays, and Fridays, I'm attempting here to be more reasonable and have just a mid-afternoon stream instead. This is also an attempt certainly to try and shift my sleep schedule, which is incredibly inconsistent through insomnia and other issues, I'm sure. But yeah, this is an attempt certainly to shift it a little bit further into reasonable hours and a little bit further away from unreasonable hours of waking up at 1 in the morning and then staying awake and achieving not as much as you really should achieve in a day because you're awake in the middle of the night. There are many reasons why, if I could afford it and had the opportunities in other ways, I would like to live in a place like Manhattan where things are open 24 hours and the city never sleeps. I'm not sure that Manhattan in 2025 is even really like that, but that idea certainly makes a lot of sense. But no, that's not likely to happen. Let's scroll down the SteamDB 24-hour peak concurrent player base. Counter-Strike 2 still at the maximum. I assume that is because there's a significant amount of bots in probably a lot of these games, although questionably it might be Schedule 1 that shows where your real numbers start to jump in, because I don't think Schedule 1 is multiplayer, so it would make a lot less sense for there to be bots in that game. So yeah, there is that. Then we're seeing like Bongo Cat, which I still haven't seen anything about, so I don't know what the deal with that is that it's so popular. It looks to me like it might be actually a software that just runs in people's computers 24/7, and thus the concurrent players or people playing or / using the software is going to be very high. Banana's still around with probably, I would assume, mostly bots. So yeah, it feels like to me in particular like very little time has passed since the last time we streamed on Monday. Yeah, it really doesn't feel like it's been a couple of days. I've run into yet another annoyance, which I will call a minor emergency, in that I looked in a cabinet that I don't really pay much attention to, and in the cabinet was a bunch of mud colonies beginning to form, which, yeah, upon further examination look like either carpenter ants or termites. Probably carpenter ants due to their black nature, but either way, that is certainly an issue that's going to have to be dealt with. So I've spent the past 24 hours spraying the insects, killing them with a myriad of different insect sprays. It's crazy, but you really do need probably about 3 at minimum sprays. You need basically your ant and roach raid like spray that will kill those species of insects, which are insects inherently are very different from each other. You need arachnid sprays, which will kill spiders and scorpions and things like that, which, yeah, the ant and roach spray will pretty much not kill an arachnid at all. And then you need also flying insect spray in part just because it's more aerosolized, designed to be in the air higher. And honestly, a lot of these insects, whether you may, it's pretty easy to forget that they still have to breathe air. So just spraying a massive amount will basically suffocate a lot of insects anyways, even if it is not actually a neurotoxin or some other kind of poison that is getting sprayed out. And yeah, I'm in particular trying to move towards more of an organic mint-based bug sprays if possible, because you know what, the bug sprays aren't good on human lungs either. And so my new HEPA filter, for instance, has finally started to say, hey, the air is a little bit bad here. Not a lot, but it's saying it's a little bit bad just by the amount of bug sprays. And then bleach, actually the bleach I was using to clean was actually setting off the alarms way more. And so yeah, I was using bleach to just destroy and clean up all that mud. And so yeah, and it really just turned into mud as I sprayed the mud huts. Mud mounds, I'm not sure what the best word to describe them as is. And so I had to clean out this entire pantry, which the pantry was like custom built, I think, by my previous homeowner, who seems to have custom built a lot of things and done weird decisions, in my opinion, in a lot of cases bad decisions. But he had built these shelves. The shelves are awful. They could all be easily rebuilt by having just single sheets of wood instead of what they often are, I think, built from scrap wood with just like 3 sheets to make a shelf. In the shortcuts version of it, in that there's one piece of a shelf, then there's another piece of a shelf, then there's another piece of a shelf, as compared to long cuts where it would be one piece of shelf, one piece of shelf, and one piece of shelf. Either way, you're not getting much of a shelf either way, as far as stability and just consistency there. The painting's awful on them, and yep, overall it's just not particularly nice. Although inherently I really don't care what the inside of shelves in a cabinet in a pantry, in a cabinet, it's a cabinet not a pantry, look like. But on top of that, he then put in drawers, and the drawers are losing probably an inch on either side, putting a big lip on the front. And some of these shelves are pretty high up, so as you pull the drawers out, you're just making it harder on yourself to actually be able to see what's in the shelves too. Inherently, like all the other cabinets in my house, these shelves are just way too deep inward, and it would make a decent amount of sense to try and reduce the depth of these shelves, because they're just like way too long. 3 to 4 feet deep, maybe 5 feet deep even. Nah, probably 4 feet at most. But yeah, just way too long. It would have made a lot more sense if the cabinet had just double fold doors, or a single door, but probably double fold would make more sense, that opened up, and then there would be shelves on the inside of the doors. That way, when you swung the doors open, even though the doors then would swing into a kind of narrow passage way, it would still make more sense, because you're taking some of it, probably not even a foot, but you're maybe 8 inches in depth. You're taking that storage, putting it on the inside of the door. When you open the doors, they swing out and are more presentable, and then you're opening a temporary walkway to reach the rest of the shelves. Yeah, and unless you were just trying to store skateboards, which is about the only thing long enough to justify having cabinets that deep. Nothing else really makes a lot of sense. Suppose you could try and stair step the shelves. That would be a lot of construction though, so that then there would be only a little bit lost at the top and bottom as far as space, but then it would feel like there was 3 times as many shelves, and you could see things, but you still would be reaching back pretty far. You could have certainly a giant Lazy Susan type thing, and you'd lose a little bit on the corners if you did something like that, where it was just one almost fireman's pole for the cabinetry that spun around, and that would actually work pretty well, I imagine. So Lazy Susans would work as far as it's mostly square, but still in this case a circle has to fit in a square space, so it could do the bifold doors with extra storage on the inside of the doors and a Lazy Susan, and you'd hit about the best way to optimize your space there. But for the realistic things, for all the construction and effort you'd have to put into doing all that, the real answer is really just to live with it. Just put a lot of stuff that you don't really care about into deep cold storage in the back of the shelves and forget about them, which is pretty much all I plan on doing too. Unfortunately, these are cabinets in a bathroom, so that limits how much I could put in it. It'd be kind of weird to put like canned goods and pantry stuff in it, but also with potential insects returning, everything needs to be kind of sealed in plastic tubs, and that would be the best thing, is just to have plastic tubs that can fit in it and be sealed instead of drawers. But even then, you wouldn't want one giant plastic tub. Ideally, you'd want several long ones. If you can't do several long ones, then more of a stacking factor. This Emma Snow character in Marvel Rivals is the next big female Emma Frost, not Emma Snow. Next big character to catch players' attention. Emma Frost is a weirder X-Men character in that she's probably been around for quite a while now, but since my understanding of X-Men ends really at the X-Men cartoons in the 90s, Jean Grey and the Phoenix is basically the person that Emma Frost replaced, and yeah, she's non-existent in the cartoons. I imagine it was one of those cases where they had a different writer take over the X-Men series, and somebody wanted to make a new character that they could call their own. So other than spending too much time talking about and thinking about cabinetry and cleaning up carpenter ants, which I bought this foaming termite carpenter ant spray, and I'm hoping I can spray it and not create a huge mess. It is right next to where my shower is, so I'm also hoping that my horrible plumbing work that I did a few years ago hasn't gotten so bad that it's leaking massive amount of water in that area. I imagine it isn't. Imagine they just found an ingress around that wall, because it's not too far from the exterior wall, and they just found that way in. There is always a concern when you see carpenter ants or termites that there is also a high source of water. Yeah. So yeah, I'll spray this foaming spray. Now, what's weird is I did have my house sprayed on the outside for carpenter ants only a few months ago, less than 6 months ago, And noticeably, when it was sprayed, I did not see a single dead carpenter ant. I never saw the carpenter ants that they claimed existed in the first place, but I would assume that I would believe that they were there. But yeah, whatever was sprayed, I don't think it really killed any of them. And yeah, maybe I'm a little bit paranoid, but let me put on my tinfoil hat and suggest that there might be some dishonest exterminators out there who spray the wrong chemicals either accidentally or purposefully, and don't kill all or don't kill any of an insect just so they can get people under contracts and get them to come back on an annual or semi-annual, biannual schedule, if not monthly schedule, spraying for insects. And it is a sad statement that no matter how cleanly you live, you're highly unlikely to be able to spend too many years in a house before some kind of insects start showing up, even if nothing you do is wrong. It's just kind of a matter of fact. When you make 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 square feet of space somewhere that's going to be cooler than the area around it, insects are going to want to work their way into that area, and probably were living there before the house was built in the first place. So yeah, so not only insects, it's also animals of all kind. If I was going to talk a little bit more about actual YouTube stuff, I was able to make some tweaks to my scheduling and have, over the past few hours, been able to schedule a whole bunch more shorts. I am now up to 1,001 subscribers, so 1,000 plus 1, which also is a number people often care about. My macro ran this morning with some problems, but it's still worked. My computer was giving me trouble, and it may still give me trouble, and so I went through all kinds of craziness that really don't want to do, because I'm right about to build a new computer and put Bakelite Linux on it anyways on that new computer, and just kind of mostly give up on my current computer. At some point I'll probably try and wipe it clean after maybe making a full disk image backup, but yeah, probably would wait at least a year to make sure my current computer was no longer necessary. But yeah, my new computer would be brand new, or relatively brand new. My current computer is relatively new. It's only maybe a couple of years old. But yeah, I've never had really a great experience with it. I think part of the problem is I also bought some overclock things. And if I was right now buying a new computer, I think getting a non-overclocked version of a CPU, a non-overclocked version of a GPU is much more what I'm looking for, particularly if I'm going to Bakelite Linux and performance is going to be not at the cutting edge anyways. I think cutting edge computer building at this point is pretty much a bad path to go down, particularly with Windows being a pain in the butt, both Windows 10 and Windows 11. So what I think was going wrong with my computer, even though I updated the BIOS, and when I went back into the BIOS it said the BIOS had been reset, and it seems like this has happened 4 or 5 times now where something goes wrong, my computer locks up, reboots, and then the BIOS gets reset. I think it is because the BIOS itself is trying to overclock the CPU and maybe the GPU and the RAM, but also I think in this case I messed with the virtual memory and my macros running in a bad format was having Firefox take up all of the actual RAM, and the process from going from actual RAM to virtual memory was creating an extremely system breaking, system locking up problem, which, yeah. So I've now changed the virtual memory, and hopefully I've fixed that. I've also set everything to be pretty much not overclocked, and set fans to be much more at a reasonable setting, in that I want them kind of to always be on and always cooling. It also seems like whenever it is summer, that's when my computer starts running into problems, is that there's just not enough cooling. Of course, having the air conditioner on also sounds like a jet fan in my ears, but I do know that my noise reduction is probably getting rid of all of that to the microphone and the recording. It does look like in the lockup in the last stream I lost the first hour, or what's really going to happen is I'm going to upload them as separate videos. I also, once again, to try to get back to some warm-up of the news, have found that you can go to store.steampowered.com/news, and this is news that is custom to you, which I've been trying to get back into my fall list, which is broken at the moment. I just cannot load the fall list on the Steam page because I've followed way too many games. And what it will sometimes bring up is it will say you don't have anything followed, which is not true. It's just that it's accessing the database, and the database is giving a timeout. Instead of inherently, they should just have programmed the web page to only return the first 100 results, 200 results, 500 results, whatever limit they needed to pick. And then the database would have just said, okay, here's the first 500, and then the web page should have just had a page 2. Or it even could have errored out and said, you're only seeing the first 500 results, whatever. But it's not even doing that. So, yeah, almost certainly one person made the web page and one person made the database, and the two never really communicated what happens on an edge case where somebody has followed way too many games. But because it gives the error out, it says you can go to your activity feed or your news feed. Excuse me. So, yeah, I think my air conditioner is blowing in all the bug spray and bleach cleaning products I've been spraying in the past 24 hours into my room, which is, yeah, not good. I had turned off my HEPA filter, but honestly, I think it actually is somewhat helpful in this situation, so I'm gonna go ahead and just turn that back on. One of my smart bulbs, also speaking of smart devices, has decided to burn out on the LEDs, which makes a weird situation in that I could still use it in a light socket to turn on, detect if power was going to the socket, but I don't think it would make a lot of sense in many cases to do that, because you couldn't actually illuminate the area where the light socket is. So yeah, that would be weird to keep a half-broken product in rotation and use it. And in fairness, these are kind of my first generation smart bulbs, but they are only like 3 years old too, so they really haven't lasted as well as they really should have. The old things of non-smart LED bulbs claiming to last 10 to 25 years is pretty much an exaggeration nowadays, and maybe it was an exaggeration there. Anyways, I'm bouncing all over the place. So with this newsfeed, I'm thinking I can redo how I do follow list catch-ups, because this is set up here where you can have all kinds of filters as far as events and live streams and sales and news, which I don't care about, but I do care about content updates, which they say are new game content, expansions, DLC or bug fixes, and releases, new games, beta, seasons, or DLC release schedules. And this could include games that are already in your library or on your wish list, or they're just recommended to you, or posts about the Steam platform itself, or featured posts, which is pretty much just advertisement. You can also follow curators you're following. Now weirdly, you'd think you could click this little gearbox, little gear here, and this would close the filters. But no, you actually have to click your news. So my thought here is, if I'm following games and I want to reconsider a game as far as whether to put it on the wish list or not, there is a real argument as far as relevancy goes, as far as what I'd actually put on the stream, in that I look at games that actually have recent updates. Now, in exact contrast, that means I would have to have a different setup, which probably would just be going back and doing it the old-fashioned way, which was just going through it alphabetically, which is the way it's ordered, to look at games that haven't updated themselves at all. But it would probably make it a lot easier, certainly, to know if things haven't updated when there's just less games overall to go through. And certainly I can take this news feed and I can scroll down as long as I possibly could want to, and start at the bottom as far as I can go. I imagine this newsfeed might just go back years and years and years, but start at the bottom, remove games that had updates 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, and still don't have any relevancy. And I've already done some of that too off screen, and a lot of that would have to be done off screen because it's just not really relevant or important as far as talking about games that haven't updated in the past 6 months, and also are either below positive ratings or otherwise just under reviewed and have less than 30 reviews in the first place, or just look like games that I actually would never care about. And I've been fairly cruel on eliminating things from my follow list and just trying to once again reestablish and rethink about what are the realistic games I might actually buy and play someday, and what are games that are overall just maybe good for other people but not good for me, or just absolutely not good for anybody. On that similar thought, as I was going through this, also, well, not as I was going through the news feed, but as I was going through watching the macros open up games on Steam, there is very much a case where it's not really worth it, particularly if I'm going through new news. It's not going to be really worth it to look at games that have already been put on the follow list just because they're being released, because there is redundancy there. If somebody puts out a press release on a game, And notice how a lot of these updates are just repetitive announcements. But yeah, if somebody puts out a press release of a game and then the game is coming out in a week, in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, is it really worth it for me to just quickly go through that game that's already on the fall list anyways a second time? And just almost always what I'm going to do is just close that tab anyways and not make another YouTube short on it. And since I really have gotten to the point now where I'm not really commenting on any of the games that are coming out on Steam, and it really has just become a slideshow when we get to the end of these streams and look at all the new games coming out on Steam, it kind of makes some sense to just adjust my curate function in the same way that it closes games that have not YouTube family friendly content. Just let it automatically close games that are already on the fall list. Now, programming it to do that might prove difficult because there is something uniquely special about the follow list button on Steam pages, in that it is both there and not there. Let's just open this one in a new tab and I will use that as an example. And see, I've gone back to March here, so not very far at all. So I really would have to just hold down the page down button for quite a while to get far into the past. But yeah, this will show in general what happens when you click on any of the news articles, is it takes you to a press release. In that press release, there is this that you can click on that will take you to the actual page. And here's kind of a great example of something that I can take off the follow list because it is mixed reviewed and it is over 30 reviews. So I feel like that's a decent number of people saying they're not liking it for one reason or another. Plus, it's a card game, and that's one category where I'm going to be a little bit more cruel and start to really curate down to a much smaller amount of card games. But yeah, what I was saying here is this checkbox is not a actual checkbox as far as the HTML standard. It's just a picture with a box and a check on it. And this following box is different completely from the follow box. So when I clicked on the following box with the checkbox picture in it, basically both of these are pictures, it just through JavaScript hid the following box and unhid the follow box. So programming my macros to detect whether something is visible or not is actually a lot harder than to detect if something just exists or not. In the case of like this text here that is just text, a standard thing where there is text in the boxes, but it is still in the source code when it's hidden. Either way. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Also, next bit of news, and I guess we're getting into the news a little bit quickly here. Bazite 42 is now available. I don't think we're going to get any kind of announcement from any of my news sources though, because I think it got announced after my macros started running, or maybe there's just not enough people following Bazite's own updates. Bazite with a big release number feels different than the way Bazite works usually. Bazite being a community attempt at making something very much like SteamOS that is designed to run on a lot more hardware and desktops. We're still kind of teetering on the decision as far as whether to wait for SteamOS to come out and hope that you could just install that on a pre-built computer that you built yourself, assuming you use all AMD ATI style hardware and no NVIDIA or Intel. Well, I think Intel would actually work as far as CPUs, but AMD is probably better than Intel in that case. Mostly you're just avoiding NVIDIA graphics cards. I don't think NVIDIA even makes CPUs. But yeah, with Bakelite 42 alongside with Fedora 42, since I believe Bakelite and Fedora are based both on Arch Linux, they're adding beta support for MSI Claw handhelds, which I assume those are controllers. Kind of wish there was a link there. Let's see if we can maybe, before we even go any further, just do a Google search and see what they are. Okay. They are not controllers as I thought they were. They are full-on handheld computers. Boy, is this dark. Because I had a pop-up on it. So yeah. New handhelds, or old handhelds with new support now. Improved high dynamic range support, both under the GNOME and KDE desktop variants, which I still would pretty much recommend KDE at this point. It definitely is the way of the future, so you might as well learn it, particularly if you haven't learned either one. The only reason I could think you would use GNOME is that if you had a very specific program that only really worked on GNOME. Is there a little email there? What's the deal with that? Send via email. What the heck is opening that up? I'll have to figure out what extension, or if that's just a new thing in Firefox. Might be a new thing in Firefox. Firefox is constantly updating. So yeah. KDE Plasma 6.3.4, which is almost certainly newer than what SteamOS has. And then if you want to try out the desktop, you can either use a version of Wine with Wine Wayland built in, or enable HDR support for existing releases of Proton via the Vulkan HDR layer, which they pre-installed for you. There's improved home theater PC support. I don't know how many people really have home theater PCs. They now have a patch for Steam audio output resetting behavior. For people who don't speak Nerd, that means you can change your audio output options on your home theater PC and expect them to stay where you set them when you enter gaming mode. There's a new Bakelite DX website. That is, I assume, the developer edition of Bakelite, which I'm not really sure. There's a real need to go with the developer edition. The numbers as far as active users are going up, and they've got some stats to show off. They're working with Frey Labs Ultramarine Linux on a new live ISO experience that may come to Bakelite in the future, and a new Flatpak store is on its way to replace the aging Discover / software. Thanks to Glorious Eggroll, which weirdly is a name I recognize. Yeti is being replaced with modern and better first run installer as soon as possible. So they're just trying to update and upgrade things, which Weirdly, if Discover and the desktop mode on SteamOS doesn't get updated, there might just be this growing divide between Bakelite and SteamOS, which may very well be the case, and the desire so that there is just more of a valid argument to have Bakelite instead of SteamOS, which, if I was in charge of Bakelite in particular, I'd be incredibly concerned that the second SteamOS comes out and it's good enough to be installed on basically any handheld or any computer, and it's just really compatible, or at least as compatible as Bakelite is, and it's being run by Valve itself, you may see what is a story that we've seen several times before, in that a company with a lot of money behind it can just come in and dominate a area of open source and outplay it, in the same way that Google was able to take Linux and dominate the cell phone market with a Linux-based operating system that did extremely little for the open source community and Linux itself, in that Android, yes, technically is running on Linux, but almost every single aspect of Android is being run through a completely different API and a completely different way of making programs and a completely different way of doing things. Although I will applaud Android for at least being inter-provider, in the sense that multiple manufacturers all use some flavor of Android that they customize themselves. So there's a little bit of customization there. But also, Android was able to introduce a lot of privacy-focused concepts as far as permissions and all of that, and notifications and cell phone unique items that still could have not been added to Windows and really should be in Windows. It is kind of crazy that if Microsoft was going to do something crazy with Windows 11, that they didn't further push the idea of permissions and notifications and say, hey, let's take those great aspects of iOS and Android and say these things should also be in Windows, when they just really aren't there. And it's not like Microsoft has done anything well. The user permissions when you install an app is the same old boring pop-up screen. The notifications in Windows is the same old boring Windows notifications it's been for a long time. So I kind of thought this was an Easter egg for Easter design, but they certainly are focusing more on it. So this is dev.bakelite.gg. Bakelite GDX for game developers is in development. It's going to be powered by Fedora and Universal Blue, which my general understanding is that Universal Blue, I guess, has to be some kind of intermediary repository service that is just constantly updating, almost on a daily basis, built on top of Fedora, which I guess maybe means it's not actually built on Arch Linux, so that there might be a slight difference there. But I kind of feel like Fedora also is built on Arch Linux, so at its foundation, I would hope it's not that different, because it would be kind of crazy if Bakelite was Fedora and then SteamOS was Arch Linux, because then there would inherently just be some things that don't quite work for that kind of difference. But yeah, there's at the moment only a few downloads you can do. And Baselite does this different thing where it's like, what is the vendor of your primary GPU? Because it's going to decide which ISO disk image to get that you're then going to put onto a USB drive. It might not actually be an ISO. So they're asking you, do you have an AMD RX 4000 Series Plus, or do you have an NVIDIA RTX or GTX 1600 Series Plus, which that's a pretty old series, I think, for both, or do you have an Intel Arc Plus? So I would again say definitely build things with AMD. And then they're asking you something you probably, a lot of people will know, as far as do you want KDE and GNOME, which kind of feels like you could have both on the installer, but then you'd be downloading twice as much stuff. KDE, I suggest. Then what type of developer are you going to be? So at the moment, you can't select game developer, so you have to say other developer, which I just don't think that really changes that much. Then it says rebase to Baselite DX now, which clicking on that is then going to take me directly to a Docker pull command. So it's apparently all built on Docker, which is a disk image software. But yeah, when I was working on my servers, which I never got finished, using Docker and Docker Compose in particular was the new way I was trying to set everything up so that it would kind of consistently stay up and working well. That is a very different way of installing things, though, instead of having a live ISO, which is what they were talking about potentially adding, which is very much what people are used to doing. Universal Logic builds a diverse set of continuously delivered operating system images using bootc. The nerds speak for the ultimate Linux client, the reliability of a Chromebook, but with the flexibility and power of a traditional Linux desktop. Interesting. So bootc, let's see what that is. Again, this takes me to a GitHub link. Boot and upgrade via container images like Docker. Okay. Interesting. Transactional in-place operating systems using OCI and Docker container images. I don't know what OCI stands for. Other than Docker, there's another way in which you can basically do the same thing Docker does with a different software, which both are incredibly complicated and hard to work with, and really need professional level of server maintenance and intelligence. This page just does not want to scroll up and down. So yeah, that was a long journey, certainly, to just say a new version of Baselite Linux is out there. And in that, as I'm scrolling down the sales numbers, once again, I don't think anything has changed, and this is still these March numbers. But yeah, that was a long way of saying a new version of Baselite Linux is out there. But yeah, also, I don't know what the exact install procedure would be if they don't have a live ISO for any form of Baselite at all. It just feels like that would be a whole new thing to have to learn and do. Yeah. In contrast, it is worth pointing out that the Raspberry Pi newer bootloaders have straight up pre-flashed software on them that if you put in a blank SD card and plug it into the internet, it will pop up a downloader and installer to say select what thing you want to install, what operating system you want to install, and then it will just download from the internet and install that operating system on a completely empty SD card. Which, yeah, that sounds nice, and it's another great example of something that, why is that not built into way more expensive motherboards? Why isn't there a why isn't there a server set up somewhere for every single motherboard that if you put a empty what would it be, SSD or hard drive in your computer and plug it into the internet, why can't you download and install Linuxes and Windows and things? Okay. The thing here is trying to look up what Fedora was. Let's see. Fedora project community of people working together to build a free and open source software platform, collaborate to ensure user-focused solutions to build on the platform. Yeah. Trying to get a little bit more technical than this, though. Which I guess also Fedora is sponsored by Red Hat Linux, which Red Hat these days is pretty awful since they've been bought out. I guess I should just ask it straight out. Is Fedora Arch based? Apparently not. Of course, this is also one of these AI generated pages that is just probably not going to tell you the most accurate information. Arch favors speed, Fedora favors stability, according to this. It's easier to install Fedora. The Arch wiki is king. But yeah, it does seem there is just free. Fedora is not based on Arch Linux. It is a separate distribution that traces its roots back to Red Hat Linux. While both are popular Linux distributions, they have different development philosophies and structures. So yeah, that is weird, and that is something new I've learned here, and I'm glad I've learned it, in that if you go with Bazzite Linux, you're going with Fedora Linux. And you're inherently, that first brick in a pyramid is going to be a different brick than what you would get on SteamOS. Which definitely pushes me closer towards really just wanting to try to install SteamOS than Bazzite Linux. The path is pretty clear now that even if I had to build a new computer right now and install something on it, I would just install the recovery image of SteamOS since they don't have an installer and cross my fingers and hope everything works. If I ran into big problems, then that would be the point to reinstall and format and start over with Bazzite Linux. But yeah, there's just a weird weirdness certainly there to have that big of a difference. And if I was going to have a different operating system that wasn't SteamOS, it would almost certainly be something more Debian based, whether that was actually Debian or Linux Mint or Ubuntu or something like that. Let's see. Fedora Linux is the community distribution upstream of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which means they experiment with slightly buggier software, and then once they have done enough testing on Fedora, they put it on the enterprise software, which has to be rock solid for stability. Let's see. Features then migrate to CentOS Stream and eventually get incorporated into a version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So really, Fedora is the first level of the beta branch. Then CentOS is the second level, and there's been whole controversies around how this whole has been moved around, because this isn't how it worked originally. And then eventually the most stable is Red Hat. In contrast, Arc has no fixed releases and does not serve as a branch for another distribution, even if many other distributions are based on Arch Linux, ergo, e.g. the Steam Deck. Fedora packages use RPM format with the DNF package manager, whereas Arch uses the Pacman manager, which is probably the worst name ever as far as a package manager. But also on SteamOS, you don't use Pacman to install anything because it's locked down. Instead, you use Flatpaks and Discover to install Flatpaks, which are sandboxed versions of applications. Let's see. Fedora refuses to include any non-free software, which would include the NVIDIA proprietary graphics drivers. It uses a graphical Anaconda installer, and that offers many installation images. Arch is designed to be installed basically by geniuses via command line. Fedora has a scheduled 6-month release schedule. Arch is a rolling release system, so it's constantly getting updated. At least Arch Linux itself is. So yeah, there's a fairly significant amount of difference there. Linux is. And then here they talk about BSD, which BSD I believe is actually based off of the Unix operating system, where Linux uses the similar, if not exactly the same, API calls as Unix did, originally AT&T Unix, but was white box reverse engineered by Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux. So while a program may make the same kind of function call in its program on a Linux software or Unix software and expect the same outcome, the code that produces that outcome are highly likely to be completely different. Which, yeah, there is a weirdness there in that Unix itself didn't become the standard, and I have to assume that's because AT&T was involved, or UC Berkeley was involved, and thus they don't follow the same licensing. The BSD license is different than the GPL license, which gets far too much into legalese for a video game live stream, which I am rambling on, so let's move on. Still playing Memento Mori. Not really a lot happening new there. New character. And the 2.5 year anniversary event, I suppose, is a big news to talk about. But yeah, while there is a slight event going on there, it really, almost all the events from Memento Mori, I'm playing that on my phone, is the same old, same old. It's just doing the daily quests, just making sure people are coming back and getting into the habit of doing the same things that they should have been doing already. Still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, which they have a new Wonder Draw event happening right now, which they go in cycles, doing basically the same old. But I did make a realization there that it feels like Pokemon TCG Pocket has probably lost a significant amount of people who were there day one, because I friended probably about 10 or 11 people, and I went through my friends list, and it's now, I removed anybody who hadn't been playing in at least 7 days, and that got rid of all but 2 of the people on the friends list. So now I need to kind of play player versus player, which is heavily discouraged, and or at the very least not encouraged by the game. And in that player versus player, after a game, you can send a friend request to find more friend people, and in that I want to only request people who have English names, because I don't want them trading with me to give me Japanese or Spanish cards or some other language other than English cards. And I need to build up the friends list to try and trade with people, which is a trade system I think has been opened up a little bit now, where you can possibly trade some higher rarity cards, but it's still pretty much the same awful trade system for Pokemon TCG Pocket, in that you can't really see what the other person has, so you're just asking them to give you anything for the card you're offering of equal value, or equal rarity is probably the better term to use. And it's still very much just a system that's not good and has weird wait timers and currency elements attached to it for no reason. I have 3,500 cards of different names in Pokemon TCG Pocket, and that should feel like a lot, and it just isn't. It doesn't encourage me to make new decks, which they did, I think, tweak that so you can have more than 10 decks now, which thank goodness for that, because that was ridiculous that there'd be any limit on the decks you can build. But the single player events are not good enough that you really need to build custom decks for that. And if I was going to build even one deck, I would have to just go online and see what the top tier meta deck is, and see if I have the cards to actually make a top tier meta deck for the current expansion, which I imagine the current expansion is about to roll over to a new expansion too. Also, let's see what we have here. RuneScape Dragon Wilds is now available. Check that out. The rumors of Oblivion remake is fairly high. We looked at one game called Exposed, and that was kind of an anime looking game. It was tagged as having nudity in it, and yeah, from what I can tell, it is one of these games, of which there's quite a lot on Steam, where you have to go to the developer's website and download a patch to get all of the adult content into the game to then have a game that's even worth potentially thinking about playing. And even at that, most of those games tend to be pretty awful, or just not much of anything. Maybe not awful, but maybe just empty, shallow. But yeah. I'm still playing Modica Magica as the last game on my phone of the 3 games I've played. I want to look at this one because I think the reviews and reception on this might be oddly low. It might very well be a case that there's just no need for them to make a remaster of the Talos Principle 1 and charge people money for it so close to the release of the first game, since the first game looks perfectly fine. Here's that exposed live stream game. So yeah, this whole game is just a sex game pretending like it isn't, because in the format that you would just buy it on Steam and not install the patch, yeah, I guess it isn't, but then it also isn't really a game. No, I guess the Talos Principle is being received very positively. I guess I was dreaming up that it was mixed reviewed. Yeah, as far as Memento Mori, I mean not Memento Mori, Magical Modica, there has been continued progress there. Spending way too much time playing the game, trying to just get to a point where I can't go any further, and then at that point I'm not sure if I really understand the game mechanics well enough yet, but it seems to me like you're going to hit a point where you just can't beat any of the bosses and nothing more is going to unlock, and then the game will just be stagnated at that point. But maybe not. Maybe some new thing unlocks. It also seems like you can get very close to maxing out the characters way too early for a game that's only been out maybe a month at most. Yeah, Magical Modica is still taking up way too much of my time and not particularly fun. Definitely has gotten to the point where when you're doing boss fights, you often have to focus on the familiars, the assistant characters, and defeat them and keep them out of the way. That way they can't add status effects. Like in one boss fight, the characters add shields, stacking shields on all the other characters. So if you allow too many of the familiar characters on the field at a time and you don't kill them fast enough, then they will just all shield each other, and the amount of damage you'll do will be reduced to almost nothing. In another case, they add attack downs to your character, reducing your damage, or they add speed ups to their own characters so they attack 2 or 3 times in a row. So it is becoming much more stat based and not just brute force having a team with a very high amount of battle damage. Here's an interesting issue, certainly. As somebody who doesn't have an infinite amount of money, ideally I would want to play the blueprints right now. But in realistic terms, it would make a lot more sense to play Escape Simulator, since there's an older game and my channel's not going to be big enough that playing the blueprints itself would probably get a large amount of views or subscribers. So yeah, there's almost certainly a logic to playing this. But even playing this doesn't make any sense because I think I probably have already bought the Talos Principle 2. So if I'm going to get back to making any footage, which I at some point need to do that, really should just play the Talos Principle 2. Plus I have plenty of other games also to play. So yeah. And yeah, I'm still financially trying to get things here and there, and as far as, oh, I realized I needed this, or oh, I wanted this before any tariffs kick in, which will almost certainly have some tariff talk today. But the long and the short of it, I think, is going to come down to particularly the United States and China fighting, and a 245% tariff being put on Chinese products now. Yeah. So yeah, the Talos Principle Reawakened is slightly visually different, and I assume it's just basically the main game being rebundled with graphics from the second game. But honestly, I don't feel like the comparison is too different. Like here, you see more greenness. Here, you see a lot more greenness. So, I mean, it's pushing the graphics a lot more, certainly, but it looked fine the first way around too. Like, I can't help but feel like this might just be tinkering on a game visually, and there's just really no need for that kind of tinkering. If all the puzzles were exactly the same, see, the game was rebuilt in Unreal Engine 5 instead of Unreal Engine 4, I would assume, so it might play a little bit better. Not that the other one played particularly too difficult. There's a new chapter called The Beginning, and it looks like there's now a custom level creator, so you can make your own puzzles, which honestly I think I'd kind of have a hard time making my own puzzles on the game. I feel like all the puzzles that were in the Talos Principle were designed very well to be thought out, and if you just let an idiot like me make a puzzle, it's going to come off as being fairly generic and bland. But yeah, a new section, new engine, and a puzzle editor. If you buy the bundle here, if I bought this bundle, I could get it for $23.44, which is still probably $14 more expensive than I would want to pay for what is effectively an upgrade. Now, what's funny about this is that this, once again, but I almost certainly will get this eventually, highlights how Crow Team, as a developer, which have done well to not lay off people and shutter themselves. Of course, that may be the next thing around the corner, but they certainly have been pushed in a different direction from what they were doing, which was making serious Sam games. First-person shooters like Duke Nukem Forever, 3D arena shooters, and yes, they have a fairly long history of these serious Sam games. But yeah, there's just, I think, very little desire for serious Sam games, and they probably lost a bunch of money making VR versions of these games. But, yeah. It's just not really the audience that people are interested in as far as games being made. 2009, so 16 years ago, was the release of the first game on Steam. And obviously I own all these games, and at some point I was thinking I'd cover them, but I almost certainly would just very briefly play them, and that would be the totality of covering them, is doing just like a quick look on it and saying, hey, here's a first-person shooter game that's not really my style of game in the first place, that people had some enthusiasm for in the past. I guess I have nothing to say about that other game since I just closed the tab. And here we have no Steam Deck refurbs on sale. But yeah, it definitely would make some sense, I think, right now to grab any refurb Steam Deck you can get your hand on. There was some other product that I was thinking about grabbing if I could get it really cheap. I undoubtedly watch YouTube videos about products dozens of times a day, which is way too much advertising to put in a person's brain, certainly. But yeah, there's a e-ink screen for a conference room that is a new one from a different company that basically connects to the internet and downloads a black and white image at a certain amount of times per hour per day, and that's all it does. And so what you do instead is you use their servers to determine what that image is. So if you want to connect it to a Google Calendar, their servers pull the Google Calendar, convert that into a nice image, and then put that nice image on the e-ink screen. Plus you can combine multiple integrations of different services into one screen, and it feels like they're going to support people building their own e-ink screens and people using their servers or people running their own servers. And so they're doing some really nice open source things there, whereas the other company that made an e-ink screen for like conference room or calendars on the walls was keeping it all locked down for an annual service fee, and it was just too expensive. Still, it's pretty expensive. You're paying about $100 for the screen and maybe a one-time fee to use the servers. Maybe not. Depends on if you build the screen yourself or not, which is still a little too expensive for most people for what it really does. It has a battery built in. It runs on an ESP32. You could probably program the firmware to do some different things, but probably not too much of anything. It doesn't have like a speaker in it. I don't think it even has a touchscreen aspect to it. There's maybe a button on the back, a single button, and there's a USB plug on the back that plugs directly into the back at a 90-degree angle, perpendicular angle, which there is potentially a thing where I just found this out, which it's probably always been a thing. There are light switches that they make that will put a light switch on the top and put either USB ports or an outlet on the bottom. So if you were to get one of these calendars, conference room signs, whatever, I really wish I knew the name, come to think of it. You could just bring it up and show it since I'm gonna ramble about it anyways. Let me look up if I can bring it up. But yeah. Inherently I was trying to build something like that, but I could never get the pieces cheap enough. It just never made sense. Even if you were buying it in bulk in the components, it seemed like you were going to be making at least a $60 e-ink screen type thing, or even if it wasn't an e-ink screen, and so I eventually just gave up on it because there was just no possible way that it would make sense to make the thing and then program it. Okay, so it's a YouTube video. So let me turn down the thing, bring up the YouTube video, click on the link on the YouTube video. TRMNL. Okay. Terminal. So yeah. The only thing, it's pre-order right now. It's a pretty big e-ink screen. The only thing that the one I was trying to build did differently was I was trying to potentially fit it into a much smaller form factor over a 1 gang light switch. And at some point I even had thoughts that it might just directly hardwire into the 120 volts on a light switch, which would require transformer circuits and probably make it very thick if it was going to do something like that. That was before I knew about the light switches that would just have a transformer built into them to have USB ports. But yeah, I was trying to make it much smaller, and I was trying to program mine to work as also a Bluetooth speaker. Not that it would actually play any music, but it would pretend like it was playing music. And that way, if somebody goes into the conference room, your phone could just be paired to it and would automatically connect, and thus your phone would not ring or play audio. That way it just auto silenced phones in a weird way. Although, yeah, getting the Bluetooth to work is always a nightmare. It's a terrible, terrible system, and this would be the first version of Bluetooth, not BLE, the second version of Bluetooth or any of the newer versions. So yeah, you can see some examples here. This one has a kickstand. That was not something I ever considered, and it has a screw hole mount on it too, to mount it. Its battery allegedly lasts for 3 months, which is pretty great because of the way they've set it up so that it's programmed to check less often. And yeah, this thing doesn't listen to you because it doesn't have a microphone in it. Future-proof and open source. Now weirdly, you would want to be able to take it off the wall and use it as like an ebook reader, but you would almost certainly have to reprogram the thing and figure out some way to get it to either very consistently change the pages automatically or use its one button, which I think is all it has, to figure out how to move a page forward. But you could do that, certainly. You could long press to bring up a menu and then short press. I guess this may have been released in prototype forms to a lot of people already. Let's see. I'm hovering over in accessories and it doesn't really say anything at all there. And they're looking for investors, which the second they get investors, the whole deal is potentially going to fall apart. They get bought out by a new company. But yeah, their whole idea is to work around plugins. So you pick what you want to follow, which, let's think of the big ones. If you're running Nextcloud as your own server, that would be interesting to have Nextcloud's calendar, but more realistically, you're either going to have an Apple calendar or Google calendar. That's going to be about it. You can also have custom text. You can also have shopping lists. You can add RSS feeds, which with that you could add almost any text and push updates to an RSS feed pretty easily. I don't think Outlook calendars are online. I guess maybe they are. Or custom calendars. Like you're going to have to host these somewhere yourself. But weather information might be somewhat helpful. Motivational quotes. All of those are fairly generic and basic things. Seems like maybe you could have black and white photos show up using alias and YouTube channel and video updates. If you're a YouTube content creator, is there a Twitch integration though? No, weirdly not. Not seeing Twitch. Let's see, snap a web page, a clock, the time sort of, which the time here would probably only update once a minute at most. Probably even less than that. Just to keep the battery going. Google Tasks, if anybody uses that. GitHub contributors. Might be interesting. MailChimp. See, clearly some of these are getting put in multiple categories though, as far as the same kinds of plugins. Noticeably, what you're not going to get here though is anything that's like smart home related. More than likely, you could put something like Home Assistant on this to see a picture of what's going on, but you wouldn't be able to really control anything. You could connect it to things like an Ecobee or a Nest thermostat to see the temperature, but you really couldn't do anything with it. So I could see some people liking those features, but they are almost certainly not going to be very helpful. And I guess that is a element that people run into. Apparently it's already sold out and that you have to now pre-order the next batch of them. But yeah, that is something also that is just going to be an element to think about, is that the terminal may make a lot of sense overall for static or rarely updated information, but the second you want any kind of interaction, that is going to be beyond the scope of what you really can do. So here are some examples of recipes, is what they're calling them, as far as programmed by people other than terminal programs. This one shows you the free Epic games, which, hey, River City Girls is, I believe, available right now. I've seen like 2 games were on sale for free on Steam via Slick Deals, which I really don't have a great system in highlighting that. Here we have a KEXP playlist, which I assume that's a radio station. There's a Who's That's Pokemon. Here's the Onion headlines. Here's a Garfield comic. Yeah, you could certainly do things like that. Here is a Jellyfin recent activity as far as music being played from your Jellyfin server, which kind of gives you some information, but it's certainly looking backwards information. Simple calendar, more comics. I imagine it's pretty easy to make some of these recipes, and that they probably are mostly just web pages using similar formatting as HTML. It does seem like there's a decent number of these. So what you would think here is that the obvious next step is, if you get these integrations, if you get a big enough number of people to trending movies here, to decide trending TV, to make these kinds of programs, one would hope that they are being future thinking and that they should be able to make these recipes work in color also, and that at some future point a terminal screen with just a color screen might be introduced, or at the very least an e-ink screen with color might be introduced. Which I heard of a new technology that's not technically ink, it's called like reflective LCD, which might get away from the e-ink licensing issue, which has really slowed down the adoption and progress of e-ink screens quite a bit. But yeah, that's perhaps my gadget of the day. Of course, I also ordered a radio frequency remote terminal, or remote bridge, I guess is what it's better called, for my smart home, specifically in the hopes, and this is really hopes because this was like the only product that even promised that it could work with radio frequency. The hope is that it can help replace the remote control for my adjustable bed, because the remote control for my adjustable bed is broken, and I'd have to buy a newer model, which I'm not 100% sure would actually work, and they want like $90 for remote control, whereas the radio frequency bridge is $20, and the remote control I have right now still works. It's just the battery piece of plastic that holds the batteries in is broken, so I can hopefully program it and make that work. That being said, this product was frequently returned and reviewed very mediocre, like 3 out of 5 stars on Amazon, so yeah, there's a decent chance that one's getting sent back. But I had to give it a try, again, pre-tariff, before these things get ridiculously expensive. But yeah, that's my big product of the smart product. There's a thing that Amazon does. It's invite only. You have to write a bunch of thoughtful reviews on Amazon.com to be included in this Vine project, which then they would send you devices to review, which this is almost the same sponsorship scam that individual third-party sellers have been doing on Amazon for years, and that will send you products if you review them. You get to keep the products. But yeah, if you have an infinite amount of free time, if you're buying a decent amount of stuff, and you like to write reviews for products, write them on Amazon. I'm sure Amazon gets hundreds, if not thousands, of reviews for free for the 1 or 2 people that they actually will invite into the Vine program. But if you can get in it, not a terrible thought, certainly, to just constantly write reviews. That being said, if you are going to be in it, you're probably going to get a lot of weird stuff, a lot of Tuya smart devices that if you know nothing about Tuya smart devices, you're going to have a hard time with. And so it might be a fairly big hassle there. I'm not 100% sure that it's really a system where you aren't going to just get random things like makeup or shoes or clothing that's not particularly in your size with the same expectations that you write reviews for those products. I think you can kind of limit it down to things you're actually interested in. But even if you said you were interested in smart home devices, how many smart bulbs can you really get? And at a certain point, you better be running your own YouTube channel if you're going to be writing Vine reviews anyways. Alright, well, with that, scrolling down the Steam top 10 top played games, didn't even mention what I was doing there, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and then I'll be back in like 20 minutes. So far everything is good. We haven't had any lockups or issues, so I think my settings are good at least for a couple more months at least. So yeah, I'll be back in 10 to 20 minutes. Okay, I'm back. Whoops, it looks like I didn't actually click on the dual live button during that whole time. Apologies for that. The point there was to actually show off some Yu-Gi-Oh while I was taking that break, but nope, apparently that didn't happen. I was using acetone to clean off. They make these kind of rubber shelf liners, and I guess maybe they felt like a good idea originally, but after a couple of years the rubber starts to break down, and liquids and chemicals and whatever you're spilling gets through the holes because they're just like these rubber mesh netting type liners. They're not waterproof by any means, and so it just leaves a bunch of rubber pieces or foam pieces on these drawers that I'm trying to clean. And so I was trying acetone to see if that would get all the pieces off, and yeah, with a generous amount of acetone it will. That being said, acetone is probably one of the most toxic and dangerous chemicals you can get a hands on before you start buying chemicals to combine them into other things and make new chemicals. Yeah, I don't know if maybe pool bleach tablets maybe are slightly more dangerous, but acetone probably aerosolizes more fast, and is breathed in easier. But yeah, so using a liberal amount of it, my tongue feels a little numb, and maybe my lungs are burning a little too much more than they should. But they did very easily and quickly dissolve the stickiness, although it may also be wearing away the paint on the drawers, so there is that danger too. is that you are getting close to stripper paint thinner type chemicals. But yeah, if I'm even going to use these drawers, I'm really more experimenting with cleaning them to clean other shelves that have the same liners on them. If I was going to use them and really cared about how they looked, I'd probably repaint them anyways. Have somebody repaint them. But I don't know if you're going to get good even coating on something like that, which is the problem inherently with painting anyways, is that you need people who are really good at nice even coats. But yeah, the drawers are an ugly light pink color, and it's just like, why is this not painted white, or why is this not just left as raw wood? Anyways, none of that has anything to do with video games though. But so let's go through the Video Games Chronicle headlines. Now my hope after this stream is that the next time I run my macro, everything will be fairly caught up. But I'm not 100% sure I actually have it set up where it's actually saving its spot perfectly. And there is still some problems with even having two of the starter pages for my macros to open up these news stories, that sometimes the pages get put to sleep by Firefox. And I may need to go back into the Firefox settings and tell it to not do that, because I don't want to run this macro and still have a 50% chance that half of the starter pages are just going to be ignored. And opening 3 copies of the same page, I don't think is going to fix that problem. Anyways, Video Game Chronicles headlines. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's grueling hardcore mode has arrived. The game's Gold Edition DLC is now available for purchase. Leave it at that, since I really don't care about that game. Nintendo Switch 2 pre-orders will reportedly start next week in Canada. Oh. Okay. The God of War composer reacts to the Bot of War from Astrobot. Quote, "It made me so proud. Bot of War was one of several PlayStation tribute levels in Astrobot." So this is an example of Video Games Chronicles having an interview with this guy and making 2 or 3 headline articles out of it. GTA 5, Modern Warfare 2, and Far Cry 4 headline Xbox Game Pass games for April. Which it feels like a lot of the same games for the same audience coming out in April. Yeah. I guess at a certain level, that audience probably has already played all of those games, but yeah, I typically would have expected just one of those games, and then things like Neon White and SpongeBob SquarePants. In contrasting that. Yeah, I wonder if these were some games they had in their back pocket that they could put on at any point, and they wanted to put them on specifically now to potentially get people forgetting about the Switch 2. Although, I don't know why Microsoft at this point would want people to stop thinking about and talking about the Switch 2, in the sense that it seems like most of the people talking about the Switch 2 right now are unhappy with the Switch 2 for one reason or the other. As far as an isolated strategy, it just really does not make any sense at all to have 3 Gamer Bro games all at the same time. Let's see, does this have anything to do with video games? I don't think it does. Pokemon Destined Rivals, secret rare cards like Giovanni's Mewtwo revealed. Which I'm pretty sure in both the TV and the movie series, there was only one Mewtwo, originally at least. it would be interesting, I suppose, if there were other Mewtwo's introduced later. Might as well talk about X while we're loading in this page. In that Twitter/X still feels very much like the only option. I did spend some time looking at Mastodon. I mean, not Mastodon, Blue Sky. Maybe there isn't a way to do Mastodon, but I haven't figured out how to do it yet. But yeah, looking at Blue Sky, there's still just very, very few people adopting it and going to it. And so it just doesn't feel like it's going to become a real competitor to Twitter. And for me in particular, it won't become a Twitter competitor until YouTube actually is on a service, which I don't think it ever will be. I think the idea of people complaining on Twitter to YouTube just proved to YouTube that they don't want to have those kinds of accounts when it's just going to become this get around the customer service roadblocks that companies like to build. I have seen a Mewtwo with green instead of purple here in his tail / pouch, whatever you would call that. So I feel like some other Mewtwo must have appeared at some point. It does bring about an interesting question as far as how many Pokemon really need to exist in the world, and while we know many Pokemon have an ability to reproduce, do all of them? We know that there's a few Pokemon that had male and female variants of them, but generally speaking, most Pokemon seem to be asexual. So I kind of wonder if it isn't the idea that most Pokemon asexually reproduce. A lot of them may reproduce via creating eggs, like Togepi. But honestly, if you said all Pokemon were actually the same species and there was just some kind of egg-laying Pokemon mother out there, that would be interesting too. They really don't get into any of that being a kids show and kids game, but yeah, there's definitely some questions there to be asked. Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered screens and details have leaked. The game is reportedly set for release this month. I heard some leak rumors, I guess as best you can call them, saying that the game has been remade in the Unreal Engine 5, that they've kind of changed a lot of how you play it, and archery now works. They've tweaked archery to work better in first and third person mode. They've changed the stealth system so it makes a little bit more sense to modern players as far as what's going on, and they've improved the walking system and the stamina system. Yeah, the full quotes here. But yeah, it does feel like they are basically creating a different game that's just going to follow the same stories and look 90% like what you imagine a remastered version of Oblivion should look like. This game is being made by a different company than Obsidian. Or, yeah, I think Obsidian's the Elder Scrolls company. No, it's not Obsidian. It's, well, whatever the Elder Scrolls company is. So they're still, I suppose, either working on Starfield patches or Elder Scrolls, the next Elder Scrolls game. But yeah, Todd Howard's not involved, and Todd Howard's company is still dropping the ball in a lot of ways as far as just not releasing things fast enough and then not releasing things good, both in that the last Fallout game wasn't particularly great. Fallout 76 maybe has a few good points here and there, and Starfield definitely was not particularly great. A Metal Gear in concert is coming to London later this year. Tickets for the show go on sale this week. Once again, we have a weird video game connected concert thing. Maybe this is a whole deal of maybe post-COVID people are getting back to going to concerts, or people are trying desperately to do gimmicks around concerts to get people to come back to concerts. I'm not sure, but yeah, there definitely have been more video game concerts in the past 5 years, and that may just be a case also that video game companies in particular are willing to license music out and have it be played. There's still a weird disconnect in my mind, though, that concert music is going to be fairly foreground music, whereas most music for video games is going to be background music. Even though the orchestra style music probably suits a lot of video game music and often is in video game music, it's still just not going to be the same thing. Like, the best example I think you'd get from that is something like Canon in D, where it's big and bombastic and has bumping, has booming sounds, not bumping sounds, going on like crazy. It just is not really what you typically have in a video game. The most notable exception in my mind still very much is the beginning of Bayonetta 1, where they have the fully lyriced song being sung of Fly Me to the Moon, much closer, in my opinion, to the Neon Genesis Evangelion version of it than the original version. But that really was the only song there, and that basically was a pre-credits sequence. Moving on, the Minecraft movie blockbuster train continues as it cleans 550 million. Jack Black movie is tracking ahead of the likes of Sonic 3 and Detective Pikachu. I did watch most of a review of this, and yeah, the review basically said that this character is awkwardly inserted, and it almost feels like this character should either be a bad guy or this character and this character should be merged together. Jack Black is really just being Jack Black at this point, and I guess he's starting to become almost like a Jim Carrey character in that it is movies may become Jack Black vehicles where Jack Black is just doing that. And then there's kind of nothing amazing to be said about any of the other characters, that they sometimes get split up and that they should be going on some kind of journey, that the message is muddled and just not particularly well shown. And then the Minecraft stuff was basically there and really had nothing to do with what was going on with the story and the characters of the humans there. And of course, there is also just some nonsense going on with kids being internet memes and flipping out, I guess, around the chicken jockey scene, which I don't even know where that came from or what the whole silliness there is from that. If the Minecraft movie becomes the best-selling video game based movie, barely based on the video game, I think it unfortunately sets kind of a continuing problem here, in that the Sonic the Hedgehog movies are only loosely based on the Sonic video games, which there isn't really a lot of story around the Sonic video games, or at least the early ones. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is really not connected to any of the Spider-Man video games at all. It's a completely separate thing. And Pokemon Detective Pikachu really is not connected to any of the main Pokemon games. I'm not sure if the Detective Pikachu game came out even before the movie did. And yeah, when you get into like Super Mario Bros. Movie, that perhaps tries a little bit more to be connected to the video game, but in my opinion, the Super Mario Bros. Movie was pretty awful at doing that. So we aren't having any movies here that are actually particularly loyal to what the video games are about or what the video game stories are. And it's setting a really bad precedence at the very least for that Zelda movie that's coming out. Because, yeah, once you start getting into a Zelda movie that's supposed to be around, I assume, Breath of the Wild, maybe Ocarina of Time, if the story isn't following that narrative pretty closely, it's gonna be a real shame in my book. That being said, to get back to Minecraft, still don't really know what you would do with the Minecraft movie. If anything, I would think you would probably want to bring in like Captain Sparkles and a bunch of Minecraft streamers and just have them do cameos in some way. And I don't know how you really pull that off. And I don't know what you really do with the Minecraft movie, but there are some basic things. Like punching a tree. We don't see that in the trailer. Maybe it does happen, maybe it doesn't. As far as your first day. Building a mud hut to live in for your first night. Getting blown up by a creeper. I think that does happen. Fighting the Ender Dragon and going through the whole process of getting portals to get to the end and fighting the Ender Dragon would be definitely a big goal, certainly. Too. Maybe making a cake, maybe making a notch apple, maybe doing a little bit of redstone. Those kinds of little Easter egg type things certainly could have played a role. But yeah, if the main goal of Minecraft still is to survive long enough to defeat the Ender Dragon, that should have been the narrative of this show and of the movie, and I don't think it is. But I certainly am not going to a theater to watch it. Maybe if it's free, like the Super Mario Bros. Movie, I'll watch it streaming. Which notably, I have not watched any streaming TV in probably 3 or 4 days, and haven't really felt a major reason to do that. Probably because every second that I could have been watching streaming TV, I've been instead playing way too many cracking the cryptic Sudoku puzzles, which I'm just getting worse and worse at them and failing and guessing at them very often. One of the things is YouTube is recommending me cracking the cryptic puzzles from 2 or 3 years ago, whereas I feel like the brand new ones that come out on a daily basis, 2 episodes, 2 a day, maybe are a little bit more balanced and a little bit easier, whereas the big, most popular ones from a few years ago, I think, are really, really hard ones. HBO reports big viewership for The Last of Us Season 2 premiere. The episode reached 5.3 million viewers in the US on Sunday, according to HBO. Reached is in quotes here because that may very well be a case that they're counting every single person who had HBO as a cable, extended cable, or HBO Go via streaming. I think it's TBS also announced that they're going to bring back the librarians with a new generation. Which, yeah, it's kind of crazy they took this long to do that. Because the concept works fairly well. And if they had just waited a couple of years to get new actors, that would be cheaper than giving bonuses and raises to the old actors. I think that would have worked fairly well too. So yeah, maybe TBS is getting a little desperate, going back to the well for things they've already done. Of course, that is very typical of what I imagine cable TV is these days, is that either you're running reruns for very cheap, or you're doing the same old things you've done in the past. Alright, moving on. A 58-year-old man is the first in Japan to get suspended prison sentence for selling modded Switch consoles. The man was also fined for selling the modified systems. I don't know why this should be a criminal offense. It definitely feels like increasingly the laws in many countries, including Japan, are being expanded to protect corporations and property, and rich people's property. Let's face it, when there should be really threat of life or harm for somebody to be thrown in prison, it makes a lot more sense to me to throw people in prison for speeding than it does for them to be thrown in prison, even though this was a suspended sentence, for modding a Switch. That being said, it is also worth pointing out that some people in Japan have also been arrested. I don't know if it's gone to court yet, for using AI to generate deepfake nude type or lewd type, since there's censorship in Japan, images. And I did see that the EFF, the Electronic Freedom Foundation, is talking about how there's yet another SOPA PIPA effort trying to go through Congress yet again, where companies can, without any government interference or due process, just accuse websites of infringing on copyrights and taking those websites down, which we almost certainly know that will be abused. And that's why you need due process, and you're supposed to constitutionally have due process. Yeah, there's basically nothing in this story that feels like, to me, should have led to a prison sentence. 2-year prison sentence, suspended for 3 years, which generally, if I understand that correctly, means he cannot commit any other crime for 3 years, otherwise he goes to jail, and $3,500, which isn't really even a large fine. So I'm sure the courts feel like they let him off easy, and I'm sure in the Japanese way, he probably had to plead guilty, as there is almost a 0% success rate of pleading not guilty in the Japanese criminal system, which, if you have a criminal system that has a almost 100% conviction rate, it's not fair. It definitely is not fair. You should be shooting much closer to 50% convictions rates, and if that means some criminals go away free, well, that's just the price for freedom. But yeah, if it wasn't the prison, if it didn't include the prison system sentences, I would be less frustrated with that, certainly. Oh, speaking of frustrations around Japan and in general censorship, I haven't heard anything from Censored Gaming in at least a couple of months. I haven't seen anything on his YouTube. I haven't been watching Twitter, so I'm not sure if anything happened there. I'm thinking since the guy who was running Censored Gaming was having a really hard time finding good housing, and just kept running into health issues and housing issues, and just was not seemingly on a good path to get his life together. And certainly that's maybe true for a lot of people, including myself, but just bad thing after bad thing kept happening, and it was really hard to tell if it was his fault, if he was making some bad decisions, or if he was just creating drama. But he also wasn't really asking people very heavily for support, and so I'm afraid, for lack of a better term, because I actually like the guy, and I definitely felt like he should just sell Censored Gaming and have them keep him on as an editor, but just sell the branding. And maybe Censored Gaming as a brand is just something nobody actually wants to invest in. But yeah, particularly since the game was just censored in the UK, and he was in the UK, it definitely feels like he should have made some content by now around that, talked about it. But yeah, he seems to be gone. He's either given up on YouTube, which maybe that's the best case scenario, is that he gave up on YouTube and was able to find a job and a meaningful way of supporting himself better and getting his life together better. But I also am afraid that he's in a ditch somewhere, or just in a really bad situation, and that would really suck if that was the case. Meanwhile, as far as society goes, one fewer voice against censorship exists while he is gone, and there are so few voices out there that are against censorship anyways. But yeah, there's nothing more you can really report on other than to say I miss him. I've noticed his absence. That's about it. Let's see, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remake release date reportedly narrowed down. Which, okay. I know that there's a heavy amount of people who really loved Oblivion, but I am just not one of them. So, on that aspect, Oblivion, if I were to play it, would just be a new game to me. And frankly, I feel like I could wait 4 or 5 years, play Oblivion, and I still probably would be at least 5 years away from playing a new Elder Scrolls game. And if I was going to go backwards and play Elder Scrolls games, I feel like you're going to get weirder and weirder when you get to Elder Scrolls 3 and Elder Scrolls 2 and Elder Scrolls 1 Arena, which is not even a RPG game, which I still feel like if they were going to remake things, they probably should have just started with 1, or rebooted the whole series and had a new game called Elder Scrolls 1 that was completely different from Elder Scrolls Arena. Elder Scrolls Arena in particular is unique in that it has a bikini-clad fantasy girl on the front of it, which they moved away from that stuff in favor of instead having a focus on the fantasy elements and more family friendliness. Sorry, I'm distracted right now. I'm trying to turn off the gas alarm that is going off in my kitchen, and I can just barely hear it. I also set off my water leak detection alarm because I was mopping the floor and just bumped the mop up to the sensor, so I guess that's a good check of the battery to tell me that it's still working. What's not working is some of the smallest smart bulbs I bought. They seem to get stuck and don't want to turn on when they're told to turn on. So yeah. It's almost no surprise though that if you have these tiny little bulbs, which I have to have for the fixtures that they're in, that they would be less likely of actually working. Well, it's not connected to the Wi-Fi. It's going off. Darn it. Well, forget it then. I'm sorry, I'm getting really distracted today. I'm also feeling the sleepiness start to creep in on me. That's not a real phrase. But yep. Again, I'm trying to push myself here to do these in the afternoon instead of, or the evening now, and instead of trying to wake up at 10 or 1 in the morning and stream. What's going to be weird though is it's going to turn out that even streaming today, I'm going to see that the number of views are way down, and that I really do need to stream at like somewhere around 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Yeah, that's just weirdness. If that was the case, I really need to shift my sleep schedule so I go to sleep just an hour or two after streaming, and then that would just be staying up relatively late instead of streaming when you just woke up at 10 to 1 in the morning. Moving on, there's a quote here: Nintendo is losing their identity. Shuhei Yoshida says the Switch 2's focus on power is what other companies would do. This is the former Sony Interactive Entertainment president. Feels the Switch 2 is uncharacteristic of the company that thrives on innovation. To a certain point, I think Nintendo's identity has to change. There's a new president of Nintendo of Japan, thus a new president of Nintendo overall, and their identity in the past has been one failure console, one success console, one failure console. Their identity also in the past has been fairly gimmick based, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I am a little surprised that the Switch 2's biggest gimmick is mouse mode, which doesn't even feel like much of a gimmick, and a pretty awful chat system and cameras. But inherently, Nintendo also needed to catch up there, and they needed to have a camera system. They needed to have a chat system. They needed to be more powerful so that third-party developers could actually get their games to run on the Switch 2. They probably needed to add a mouse mode for a few games. And I do expect that if there is a Switch 3, which probably won't be called the Switch 3, but who knows, you probably will get back to some gimmicks and some more experimental things. But maybe not. Maybe we are just finally coalescing on the perfect form factor for a while at least, and that handheld devices are just what people should be making. It's also worth pointing out that if we were going to really go on a longer time scale, Nintendo's identity for like the Super NES and NES is very much a fairly bland identity and very different from the weird GameCube controllers or Nintendo 64 controllers or the gimmick of the Wii. And then if you go back even further, Nintendo had a completely different identities in the past before then with the Game & Watches and the arcade games. And one would argue that arcade games were all about experimenting, although I don't think any of the Nintendo arcade games were particularly that experimental. If you go back even further with the bowling alleys and the light guns and the Hanafuda cards that Nintendo were making and the toys Nintendo was making before making Donkey Kong, then that is a completely different identity. So Nintendo has long since lost its identity in the over 100 years it's been in business multiple times over. That doesn't mean they won't find a new identity. And this feels very much just like sour grapes coming from Shuhei Yoshida, who obviously once again was just interviewed, and this is another quote mining headline from that interview. Let's see. Metro's 15-year anniversary is celebrated with free game and the reveal of the next installment's important themes. So Metroid 2033 is free for the next 48 hours on Steam. I already own it. I assume I got it for free, but I could have very much paid for it. But yeah, there is definitely a free game for some people there if you want to check that out. I'm wondering how long that alarm is actually going to go off. The acetone in the air, I imagine, has just reached it, and as such it's probably really unhappy with that, because yeah, I haven't sprayed anything else in the past few hours. Yeah, and right now that gas alarm is lying face down on the floor. It fell off the wall and I haven't bothered to pick it up in a few weeks because I just didn't get around to it. I'm still supposedly supposed to be decluttering and cleaning my house, but it's a hassle and it's a big project, and I keep finding new things that also could use improvements. And also moving on, Zero Company is the next Star Wars game from Respawn. The game will be fully revealed this weekend. So, is this the same company that made the two previous Star Wars games that were kind of single player-ish? Zero Company feels like an odd name, particularly when you have a thumbnail of multiple people. So one would assume this is just company number 0. And yeah, I'm not a big enough Star Wars fan to have anything else to really say or care about, as far as particularly around Star Wars games. And see, that brings us to Gematsu articles, which, yeah, we didn't run into any duplicate Video Games Chronicle articles today, nor did we run into a ton of them. So, Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time Minor Life Trial gameplay is available on Gematsu. The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion remastered screenshots leaked via the Virtuous website. Which they've got a whole gallery of screenshots here, if you want to check that out. Shadow Drop reportedly set for the week of April 21st. Deck of Haunts launches May 7th for PC, later in 2025 for the PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch. This is... Gematsu was one of my news sources that didn't open up YouTube Shorts. Didn't open up, not YouTube Shorts, but didn't get opened up the tabs using my macro, so I manually opened all of these stories, which means I didn't open up all the shorts, the links to YouTube pages. Space Chef adds a PS5 and Xbox Series versions. I have to admit, certainly too, I've really just boned up the whole process here of trying to update my macros and trying to get my macros to work, and in that I've just complained way too much about them not working, well, failed to get them to actually work. And I've been doing it for months now, and I probably should have just said nothing at all. Yeah, if I could go back in time, I would have just said absolutely nothing about the macros not working, opened things up manually, continued to work and to improve things and make it work in the background, but not brought any of that to the public. But then that is weirdly exactly what these live streams are about, is to kind of bear the truth and the reality of being a content creator a little bit more and talk about my process a little bit more, which my process is incredibly different and crazy compared to other content creators who would instead take a 2-hour chat about a single game and chop it down into a 30-minute video and put it out as a podcast episode once a week. Yes, Your Grace Snowfall launches May 8th for PC and then later in 2025 for Xbox One and Series and Switch. Check out this Steam page. But yeah. Again, if I update my curate part of my macro, then this game being on the fall list would close this tab, and then we just have an article talking about the game without a tab to look and see whether it was on the fall list or not, which means I would have to put a high level of faith that it worked correctly. Palia is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series on May 13th alongside an Elderwood expansion. Yeah. One of the ways to have faith in my macro doing the right thing is also I'm going to try and have it actually use the echo command to... Does this have any in-app purchases? Yes, it does. So there's nothing wrong with this game from the looks of it, but it is a life sim game. It has in-app purchases, and it's not really showing anything that interests me. So I'm going to take it off the fall list in an effort to reduce the things on my fall list as much as possible. But yeah. I lost my train of thought as far as what I was talking about. But yeah, oh yeah, I was talking about how I'm going to use the echo command in my macros to log what pages actually get closed. So very much a trust but verify thought, in that if the macro can prove to me it's closing just the things that I should be closed, I can eventually learn to trust it. Game Pass adds Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, Towerborn, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and more in late April. I didn't even know Expedition 33 Clair Obscur was out yet. Maybe it's coming out day one. Let's see, Baldur's Gate 3 Patch 8 is now available. Haven't heard anybody say anything about Baldur's Gate in a long time. I imagine people had their fun with it and then moved on. It would be interesting, certainly, if the world of tabletop gaming also had their fun with Dungeons and Dragons themed content, and as such they had more generally moved on to other games, but that didn't really happen ever. There definitely are some people that moved on to other games, but not in large amounts. The Warhammer fandom being probably the next biggest audience as far as tabletop gaming, and then arguably maybe actually the next biggest audience would just be non-role-playing game tabletop gaming, board game players and things like that. Dune Awakening for PC has been delayed to June 10th. Constantly want to try to see if I could get into Dune, but I constantly never feel like there's any way I could penetrate the massiveness that Dune is. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 Trigon update is now available. New player versus environment, missions, new weapons, and more. Lovecraftian fishing adventure game Dreadmore has been announced for PC. Jeez, and this may very well be an example of just how stupid I am, and that I'm hearing the gas alarm go off in the other room. I'm not going to investigate it. I'm not leaving the house. What happens if actually my gas oven, for instance, did pop a leak and the whole house is about to explode? Guess that would solve the cluttering, decluttering aspect pretty well. But yeah, almost certainly that's not the case. You know, a controlled explosion that would damage the foundation and just specific sections, a small section of my house, wouldn't be incredibly devastating. There's definitely a lot of stuff I could take or leave if I lost it. I'd hate to lose any Legos and Lego sets, but honestly I could replace those pretty easily. Losing my Nintendo collection in the garage would be impossible to replace, nor would I even bother to try. Losing my computers and stuff, or my anime collection, would be very difficult to replace and hard to justify replacing. As far as the anime computer, would be easy to replace but very expensive these days. So yeah, particularly around the kitchen area, if there was just foundational damage that would cause the house to be rebuilt as a brand new house, that would be way worth it. Make the insurance company pay for it, which they probably wouldn't want to or wouldn't. It would be way worth it to lose a refrigerator, some furniture, oven, things like that. Things that I easily could be replaced and I have no special love for. Of course, it's never going to really go down like that. Yeah, insurance loves to not pay out or make it extremely difficult to not pay out. And I don't think a house would be totaled in most cases. Anyways, that has nothing to do with video games. I'm just now fantasizing about getting a new house for free. Might as well just fantasize about winning the Publishers Clearinghouse giveaway at that point, which then I could build a new house from that money. Barely, but I could do it. Arc Riders Tech Test 2 is set for April 30th on May 4th. This is how I also know I'm getting sleepy, is that I can feel my brain is starting to shut down as far as perhaps good sense and holding my tongue. Let's see, Rydo, spelled a different way than I spell my name, remastered, is The Mystery of the Soulless Army, has detailing more characters, demons, and progression systems. Yep. Once again, this is one of the Devil Summoner spin-off games that or it might actually be in the Devil Summoner series, which Persona is a spin-off from that series. What's weird about this is the appearance of these characters. I don't know what time frame this really is supposed to be. I guess maybe it doesn't really have a time frame. At the very least, they aren't trying to do a new monster every day, which is what they did with the last Devil Summoner game. And instead they're just showing multiple monsters all at once. Let's see, Steam Hearts and Advanced Variable Geo's Saturn Tribute to Xbox One has been cancelled. Let's see, the Xbox version would have required too many changes, the developer says. I wonder. Is a full quote. Due to the nature of the title being a revival of works containing provocative expressions, we have been developing it with the goal of offering a consistent gameplay experience across all platforms. While each platform has its own set of standards, we've made continuous adjustments to the content. However, for the Xbox version, we have come to the realization that significant changes to the expressions will be necessary. So, yeah. Apparently there's something there that Microsoft demanded be censored. And I don't have a Steam link happening here on this one. Let's click on Steam Heart to see if we can get a general idea of what the game looks like. Or maybe we can find a Steam link from this page. It was originally released as a PC game in 1994. Which is just crazy that something from 1994 needs to be censored for some reason in 2025. So yeah, here's Steam Heart Saturn Tribute. Yeah, it's just a shoot 'em up game with some anime characters and a little bit of bikini style skin lewdness to it, as far as I can tell. Let's see if we have an ESRB rating. The game contains nudity. It does not contain sexual acts, it says. Okay. So it's probably just an old school bathing, Japanese bathing, public bathing type scenario. Or just good old fashioned cheesecake fan service, which apparently is too much for the precious minds at Microsoft. I did say that I thought I had figured out a way to start showing ESRB rated in for mature games that have the AGN on it. In retrospect, I think maybe that's not the case. My computer has rebooted several times, so I'll have to wait and see until I can finally get my YouTube shorts being made to see if there actually is a case there where I could be showing specifically games that are ESRB rated M for mature, because those games in particular, if they're released on a console in particular, may always require an age gate, and so they may not work. And so I'm thinking maybe that won't happen. There is also a YouTube family friendliness possibility here that I shouldn't make YouTube shorts around games even like this, when really I don't see too much here. I mean, it really just feels like bikini clad anime girls, and yeah, sure, that might be M for mature or teen plus, but nothing particularly special here stands out, except for the fact that this character here seems like they're fairly short, and there seems like there usually is an assumption that if a character is short, that they are younger / underage, and maybe that was the red flag they had a problem with. Advanced VG here instead is a fighting game with what seems like anime girls exclusively, and less lewdness overall. This one says it has partial nudity in it, which I wonder to what extent that really means in a fighting game. I would be frankly a little bit surprised if it even meant a boob gets shown, maybe a butt. But I wouldn't also be surprised if partial nudity is just a bare back. Yeah. Once again, though, very old game. Doesn't feel like something that really needed to be censored. And I can't help but fear that both of those games have been censored for the PC releases also already, and to be on Steam, or just because they were censoring everything to be the same for the Xbox version, and now they may be censoring things just because they had already done the work and they don't want to undo it, or they may be censoring things to follow in line with a Nintendo version or a PlayStation version. And so I can't help but feel like the odds of the PC versions being completely uncensored are fairly low, much lower than they should be. And at a certain point, what's the point of re-releasing a game when you're not actually re-releasing the game? Moving on, we have the Famitsu review scores for issue 1895. Gal Guardian Servants of the Darkness, which is another game that basically changed its entire format and style for the Gal series. Gal Gun series was what it was before, to be more family friendly, I guess. That being said, it got 31 out of 40, not a terrible review score. The 100-line Last Defense Academy, which I think is a visual novel, got 35 out of 40, so really high score there. And then Sono Kuni for the Switch only got 30 out of 40. Let's see. I want to double check on make sure this is a visual novel game, just to be certain. Multiple endings, adventure story game, not tagged as a visual novel. This is, I believe, from one of the creators of Danganronpa, just from the visuals of it. One of the games, Tribe 9, is a free-to-play game, and so with like in-app purchases, so there's really no good reason why I'm not playing the Tribe 9 right now as we speak. But it would be kind of like a mobile game that probably has dailies. So even though it's well received, I question whether it's going to be a bad experience. Here we have a brand new game with partial nudity. But yeah. Boy, do I wish we lived in a world where partial nudity was just normal lifestyles. And that, yeah, you if you're a human being dealing with other human beings, you might see some nudity sometimes. It's not that big of a deal. American Arcadia is coming to the PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series, and Switch on May 15th. It's currently available for PC. Let's see what the reception is on Steam on that. Very positively, and I have already opted to put it on the wish list. I believe this is one of the games that I moved to the wish list to reduce my follow list. Of course, moving it from one list to the other list is just going to make my wish list too long at some point. So I may just be moving a problem from one point to the other. King Arthur Legion 9 is coming to PS5 and Xbox Series on May 9th, currently available on PC. Which, it is kind of crazy that there's an RPG called King Arthur Legion 1 through 8, and I have not heard of it. This one is mixed right now, so I still am very much in the case if I can't immediately make a decision, I'm just going to leave it on the follow list. Shotgun Cop Man launches May 1st, which looks like a very silly game from the thumbnails, but the actual gameplay here doesn't look particularly that interesting. I guess what I need to do, the more I think about it, is I need to make sure the games have actually released, and then if the game is released and I'm not interested in it, I should then take it off the follow list. You know, that makes it a little bit more of a challenging thing to do, but not by much. Eternal Strands free DLC Stargazer launches April 15th. I do think, however, I can't do too much to automate removing things off of the follow list, because I really do think my brain has to see the games and needs to see the games. Otherwise, I'm not putting any information in my brain at all. Bindi and the Ink Machine is coming to the PS5 and Xbox Series in Q2 of 2025. The single-player turn-based tactics game Star Wars Zero Company has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. This headline telling me a lot more than Video Games Chronicle told me as far as what the whole game even is. Feels like it at some point may have also been a mobile targeted game, if I was to guess, just by the single player turn-based tactics aspect of it. But nope, it's coming to consoles and PC. Forgive Me Father 2 is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series, and Switch this fall, currently available for PC. I wish there was an easy way, I don't know how to really do this, to figure out the original launch locations of games, because increasingly, I can't give any numbers, but it feels like things are getting released on PC first, if any console is getting it early, or any platform is getting it early, I guess is the right phrase to say there. Very rarely do we see something come to Xbox first, or PlayStation first. A few things for PlayStation, certainly as far as their top tier games are released years earlier on the PlayStation than they ever come to PC. Nintendo games only get released on the Switch if they're directly from Nintendo, and basically nothing otherwise gets released on the Switch first. So yeah, of all the options, PC gaming is winning as far as where to play if you want to play the most amount of games the earliest, and it certainly makes that easier for streaming. Moving on, Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection Arcade Classics title update launches April 16th, adds an offline version, versus, and more. Let's see. No Sleep for Kaname Date from the AI Somnium files details its game system and a new escape section, which No Sleep definitely feels like my life half the time. I think that's probably true for a lot of people. I was watching another YouTube content creator talking about just how much they had been pushed and changed as far as their gaming lifestyle as they became a content creator and had even a little bit of success. Which, yeah, I definitely can follow along with that, in that YouTube has definitely pushed me in all kinds of directions, and I've changed basically how I would play games by an amazing amount. These screenshots alone are not really showing me much as far as actual gameplay, but I don't think there actually is a lot of gameplay in this game. Let's see, the Kindachi mystery series, The Hanji Murders, launches April 24th. It's a mystery visual novel puzzle game. Which, weirdly, we don't get a lot of mystery or puzzle visual novels, although No Sleep for Kaname Date may be an exception to what I just said. This one looks weird. It looks like you're going to get walls of text, which might be too much for me. Azure Promelia set sails towards the Blue Beyond trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. Apparently it's an action RPG. And then Wings of the Endless launches May 8th. It's a side-scrolling action RPG. Let's see that on Steam. Yeah. The actual gameplay looking fairly different from the thumbnail, which I can't really blame them. So that's going to bring us to the gaming on Linux. I'm really debating at this point, do I even really need to make interstitial tabs, or should I just verbally announce it every time, since I'm doing that anyways, and allow that? No, I think visually there's a real reason, and it might even make making chapter markers in the future easier if I ever tried to do that. So I should make an interstitial at some point. It's just very low priority. Let's see, V Rising 1.1 Invaders of Oakvale will bring lots of new content and official Steam Deck support. So more Steam Deck updates. Gnomes is a new favorite tower defense game that blends in roguelike mechanics. This does not look like a game that interests me though, so yeah. I'm still tempted to not even bother to talk about tower defense games, but it's not even like tower defense games are overly prominent these days. 4A Games is giving away Metro 2033 Redux for free for 48 hours. Don't think that this is the newest of the games by any means. Yeah, 11 years ago is when it came out. But yeah, Metro Exodus and Metro Last Light, with Metro Last Light Redux being released in 2014, and then Metro Exodus being released in 2020. So I'd assume that Last Light is the next game in the series. It always sucks when you have to try and figure out the right play order for these kinds of games. Let's see, merging a Western with Eldritch or Blood West is an awesome and now Steam Deck verified. I feel like this is a game or a game similar to this I saw a long time ago. Yeah, it's already on my follow list. December 5th, 2023. Ubisoft has open sourced Chroma, their colorblind simulation tool, which it would be interesting to see if something like this gets integrated into game engines themselves. I would be interested though in also seeing how accurate their tool really is, in that it almost certainly is just mostly putting in some lookup tables into the colors so that you can see an equivalent of what colorblind people see. It says color simulation on single monitor. The solution works on top of games and can be maximized per requirement. So it's basically a window with transparency. Interesting. And it claims accurate results. It's simulation of all types of colorblind forms, of which there's at least 6, I think, of different types of colorblinds. And frankly, like any other disabilities, so many people can have such a wide variety of how it affects them that it becomes very hard to be for certain that you even have a good chance of emulating or showing people what the issue is. This is probably a great example here. If we can't really make the picture much bigger, but this is kind of a great example of where it would be fairly hard to play this game if you were this style of colorblindness. I wonder, though, in particular, if this program might be fairly useful for content creators overall to just see, hey, what does my footage look like? What do my thumbnails and my screenshots look like to colorblind people? Although, yeah, I don't know what you really can do to fix it in many cases either, to avoid colorblind issues. Yeah. And I don't know if there's even a lot of people with colorblindness that would spend a lot of time watching YouTube videos or video in general if that's an issue. Although I did know somebody with colorblindness that never really admitted it to themselves or recognized it in themselves, although it was fairly obvious they were colorblind, and I literally gave them a colorblind test and showed them that they were not able to see any of the numbers in the colorblind tests at all, and they basically blew it off as like, oh yeah, that's nothing. Of course, there really isn't a cure for colorblindness either. There's some glasses that kind of don't work that well, and that's about it. I wonder if there even would be a way to make active glasses that would augment reality to change the colorblind elements. Anyways, back to video game news. Dead Pixels from 2012 gets a surprise update with Linux and Steam Deck support, which this is looks like a pretty simplistic and old game, which might be kind of a great example of something that you might justify making a Linux version or a Steam Deck version, as it probably isn't that hard to make a Linux version or a Steam Deck version of something like this. I did see in one of the announcements of the games I followed that they were changing the API they were programming their game in to Vulkan, which is more of an open source API than DirectX, which is Microsoft's API. There's probably a couple others as possibilities. One thing though I also noticed about the news and updates is that there's a lot of version 6.2s or version, not 6.2, version 0.2, version 0.3s in some of the games. And I really feel like if you're not at least at version 6 by the, or 0.6 by the first version released on Steam, your game is just way too early in development to have a Steam page. Like, you're just gonna take way too long to actually finish version 1.0 in that case. Let's see, first-person puzzle adventure Metroidvania called Memories Reach looks great with the Steam Deck support announced. Some more details there in the description I'm skipping over. Looks like more of a space-based first-person puzzle game, which I haven't played a lot of games like that, and there's definitely room for more. Let's see, My Sims and My Sims Kingdom from EA are getting Steam Deck support, or have gotten Steam Deck support, which visually I don't think that they would be particularly demanding games, so that's probably somewhat worth it. That being said, you can see that there's not a huge amount of enthusiasm around this My Sims game, with a different visual style to it. Why did I close that? Did I just close both of them? I think I did. I'm starting to fall asleep here. I keep saying the same thing. Now, My Sims Kingdom here looks like it has the exact same screenshots as My Sims does. I guess that's the only way you can buy the game anyways, is that they're not letting you buy them individually anyways. I'm not going to make a YouTube short that just shows the same things. Very low effort on EA's part as far as descriptions and such. Yeah, and I thought of something and then it left my brain. Oh yeah, I'm trying to think, what do you even do for noxious gases in the house? I guess you just open windows and you let it float out and thin itself out. refresh air. Like, that's, I guess, the only thing you really can do. There's no special, like, baking soda you can throw up in the air to absorb things or anything like that. We don't have any nanobots that would attach itself to airborne particles. HEPA filters might work in a longer amount of time. But yeah, opening the window is probably the best bet. Anyways, we have a headline here. I can't wait to send people flying in Aqua Park Tycoon with a new trailer. Here. Okay, that's slightly different as far as a theme park tycoon simulator type game. DOT Defense is a fast-paced, gamepad-friendly real-time strategy game, now on Steam with co-op and versus modes. I guess it has a Linux version. A mention of a Steam Deck. Yeah. Definitely not grabbing my attention. I can't help but wonder if a few games are being skipped by me when I look at all the new games on Steam, and then I'm getting press releases from Gaming on Linux that's bringing them back to my attention. The final Baldur's Gate 3 patch is now out with crossplay photo mode and a new subclass. I guess that means at best you can just hope for a Baldur's Gate 4 to be made at some point, which I wouldn't be surprised if you kind of need the next game to be made, in that I think the story and the branching paths of the story Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't leave it really open for DLC or just expansion or infinite playability. Apparently they made a silly animated short here. But yeah, just looking at this, it does feel like this could have been a soft pitch for an Adult Swim style comedy or a Fox animation domination style comedy. But yeah, Fox is bringing back several of its old animated shows, doubling down on that. American Dad, I think, is coming back in particular. Let's see, Ludaro puts a roguelike deck building twist on the classic board game of Ludo. Okay, that does at least sound like it would speed up the process of playing Ludo, which is this game here. Fairly simplistic game, kind of boring game. You don't see a lot of people opting to play it. I think Ludo often has different names too for this board game. And then that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com articles, which we won't have too many of these. There's a report that the Gamers Group torches PC invasion and continues layoffs. This media conglomerate behind Destructoid and Prima Games has seemingly axed more positions. Gamers is not the parent company, I think, of Game Industry .biz or GameDeveloper.com, which, yeah. Why did I stop using GameIndustry.biz as a news source? Or did I? Is GamesIndustry.biz the new place? No, I may never have even considered them as far as a news source. Let's see what their website looks like. Let's see, April 16th. A jobs roundup article. This seems somewhat unique. Is there anything special here that would make me need to follow GameIndustry.biz? Influencer report highlights gender pay gap in sponsored content earnings. Interesting. Women roughly earn 32% less than men in the gaming sector, according to the report, which I would have to see the details of the report, but I question its validity immediately, because this is the same old argument that has been made and discredited very often, that women make 32 cents on the dollar via men in the United States, whereas those numbers were created, at least to my understanding, by comparing all women to all men instead of comparing women in the same position with the same educational level, which is very hard to do. Specifically in sponsored content earnings, I can't imagine why women would be making less, other than they are just maybe inherently bad negotiators, because I think a woman putting sponsored content on their YouTube channel or Twitch channel is probably worth way more than a man does doing that. I definitely see that there is a advantage of just being any woman, not even have to be particularly attractive, and having face cam on, compared to any random man with face cam on, as far as content creators go. Of course, if you're on like Twitch and you're a woman and you just want to play a game and have face cam on and chat with the chat a little bit, you may very quickly find that you're not getting much attention, because there are other Twitch streamers that are hot tub streaming and taking all the attention away from everybody of both genders otherwise. And almost certainly if you're a woman on facecam, you're going to be harassed and sexualized way more than a man would be. Yeah. And that's not all just American males doing that. There's entire cultures where that's seen as okay and acceptable, or at least it's not shouted down much. Let's continue to scroll down here and see if there's anything that catches my attention. No, it seems like GameIndustry.biz might be a good backup news source if I ever needed a backup news source, but it doesn't seem like they have a single unique article here that would tell me I need to use them as a news source. So going back to GameDeveloper.com articles, Niantic apparently is laying off 68 employees after selling its game business for $3.5 billion. The AR company's been cutting jobs to reposition its new look business as a startup. I can't help but wonder if we're going to start seeing private investment firms in particular start buying up video game companies and settling them with debt and driving them into the ground, as we've seen them do with many other types of businesses. Joann's Fabrics in the United States being the most recent example of that. Then Ubisoft open sourced its color blindness accessibility tool Chroma. We talked about that. Then they have an article here, editorial probably, how Beletro's publisher Playstack delivered a marketing masterclass. A carefully curated wheel of attention became Beletro's best friend. Which, there's a lot of text here. Media feeds into influencer, the influencers feed the community stokes more conversation. The marketing cycle begins to reach a fever pitch. I guess that's what they mean by wheel of attention, is it just gets the ball rolling and rolling and rolling faster and faster as it goes downhill. Of course, the analogy there of it going downhill may be not what you're trying to evoke. Anyways, I'm going to try and burn through all the games that came out on Steam in the past couple days, and then I'm going to go to sleep. Probably just let the alarm go off. It's one of those repetitive alarms that I think just goes forever. So I don't know if I'm even really hearing it now, or if I've just got an audio feedback loop going in my brain, which that happens sometimes. You'll hear something enough and then the memory resonates just as well as if you're really hearing it. At least that happens to me. Here's a great example of something that probably should not be allowed on Steam, and perhaps the phrase "my first" as a title of any game should not be allowed. We have a point-and-click visual novel. It looks like it is probably using some kind of AI translation to turn memes into anime characters. It looks like it's a Russian game from the language. So let's see. Meme based, almost certainly too. Which honestly I couldn't for certain tell you most of those memes. English and Russian are the languages. That's gonna be a no for me. I'm not even gonna try and promote that. Yeah, maybe I need to be a little bit more picky overall as far as what I want to make YouTube shorts on. Yeah, I've been fairly generous. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to trigger my macro to go back to scheduling YouTube shorts, because that was working fairly well this morning. So if I started it going and then it actually ran for 12 hours, I might have all my YouTube shorts scheduled. Should be nice. Of course, this is also a case when the macro ran that the tab itself just crashed inside of Firefox. Not all of Firefox crashed, just the internal sandbox tab did, which maybe means there's something wrong with my code, or maybe just means that UI Vision and Firefox still have way more problems than they should. Firefox at one point, I'm not sure if they're still funding it, was developing a new next generation web browser that was designed to have Rust-like programming language that was memory safe. Apparently it was rendering web pages much faster than one would expect. So I am yawning again. So yeah, here's one of the examples of, like, if it's already on the follow list, do I really need to make another YouTube short, or do I naturally just always close anything that's on the follow list already anyways? So did I really even need to show off that game? Am I learning anything from looking at any of these games is certainly a bigger question. Yeah, we definitely need to do something as far as web pages and how they're rendered to make it more efficient. A big part of that almost certainly is also forcing web pages just to be more efficient. Maybe introducing some limitations on what can be rendered or how much content can be rendered per page. I guess if you were going to start from scratch and take everything we've learned from the at least 5 different versions of HTML, you probably would start with everything being paginated. I'm not sure what the actual word there is, so that any amount of information would be segmented into smaller groups, different web pages, and that the idea of scrolling down in particular is perhaps a mistake. Like, if all web pages had to be just like this, fit in this point, or you have to go page forward or click next to see the next part, that would add a level of efficiency. But honestly, if there was going to be anything like that that would have ever actually happened, it would have happened when mobile phones started to become the norm. Instead of there being mobile versions of pages. Yeah, maybe there is an argument there to be made in the idea of merging the idea of mobile pages and non-mobile pages together. I've run out of things to say at this point. My yawning is coming close to back to back. So once again, I have probably failed in my goal, making worse quality footage today by being sleepy. I don't think my auto closing tab plugin that I'm using is working either. I'll have to keep an eye on that, because it definitely feels like I just saw a tab that should have been closed. We are just burrowing through some really ugly looking games. I do hate that the only way to really curate this is to just do it visually. Here's another sexual content mature game that should be in the adult section. There is a setting I could go with that would eliminate games with a little bit more adult content in it and block them from being shown. And yeah, maybe I just need to embrace that next level of censorship. And see if that works. But in that case, also, that was a game that should have been curated, and it wasn't curated, so what happened there? Come to think of it. Yeah, I have no idea. one of the keys I got from Fanatical trying to enter into that contest to win a Steam Deck was an Asterix and Obelix game, which does now give me a smaller excuse to get the rest of the Asterix and Obelix games and see if I can actually play any of those. This one has just come out of early access, version 1.0 available. This is the one, I think, where you're in these airships and then you go down into the nauseous, gassy surface to extract and explore things. Forever skies. And that's a rare case in which maybe it does deserve another YouTube short. But honestly, right now I'm not willing to do it. But I did put on my wish list, at least, if that matters. I just kind of, a lot of games here just start off mixed too, and if it's over 30 reviews, or even if it was over like 15 reviews and it's negative instead of mixed, I just don't think games are going to ever really recover from that point, or at least they're not very likely to recover from that point. I guess if the alarm is still going off at this point, then it really tells me acetone is very sticky as a chemical in the air, which it might be. It might just stay around forever. Usually a little dab will do you if you're trying to get like black marker off something, acetone, or a little bit of glue off something. But in the case of what I was cleaning, the foam, basically I have to drown it in the acetone to dissolve the foam off. There probably is some other cleaner I could use. Let's see. I might have some of the Orange Glow citrus based anti-stick cleaner. I almost wanted to give this FMV video game a chance. Stop motion game is what they're calling it. I don't really believe that's what it is. I think it's probably just photos. Alright, well, I'm sitting here not saying anything, and it says end of the show, and we are at the end of the show. So that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.